The whiskey hadn't even finished pooling across the marble when Adrian Voss noticed something that would unravel his carefully constructed world. For 15 years, he'd survived by reading people, their tells, their weaknesses, the lies they told themselves. In his line of work, missing a detail meant bleeding out in an alley. So when Naomi Reed reached for that jagged piece of glass, he saw what she desperately tried to hide. The flinch. Barely a heartbeat. A tightening around her mouth. A tremor in her hand before she forced herself to continue, as if her body had betrayed a secret her mind refused to speak. Most men wouldn't have noticed. Most wouldn't have cared. But Adrian Voss wasn't most men. He was the kind of man who built empires on the ruins of his enemies, who spoke in whispers that made grown men weep. He should have returned to his $1 million negotiation, to the territorial disputes that required his attention, to the carefully balanced violence that kept his world spinning. Instead, he excused himself. Because this woman, with her downcast eyes and long sleeves in suffocating heat, with her careful movements that screamed "Don't see me, don't notice me," was hiding something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he'd buried alongside his sister's body 15 years ago. Protective fury. He didn't know why her pain mattered. He didn't know why he followed her to the back hallway, why he dismissed his Lieutenant Jean-Sue with a curt gesture, why he stood there watching her pretend she wasn't barely holding herself together. He just knew that whoever put that suppressed agony in her movements had made a fatal mistake. They'd hurt something Adrian Voss was about to claim as his. Naomi Reed had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. It wasn't magic. It was necessity. The kind of skill you developed when visibility meant danger, when being noticed could mean being found. She'd learned to move through rooms like smoke, present, essential, but utterly unremarkable. 3 months of practice at the Lotus had made her a ghost with a serving tray. The establishment sprawled across 3 floors of polished excess in the heart of the city's most expensive district. Crystal chandeliers refracted light across marble floors so pristine they reflected the faces of men who'd never see the inside of a courtroom despite the blood on their hands. The ground floor restaurant served $30 appetizers to socialites who pretended not to notice the caliber of clientele ascending to the private floors above. The second floor housed the exclusive club, velvet ropes, beautiful people, champagne that cost more than Naomi made in a week. The third floor was where the real business happened, where Adrian Voss held court over an empire built on fear and absolute control. Naomi kept her head down and her movements efficient. She'd worked at the Lotus for 2 months now, operating under the name Naomi Rivers instead of Reed. Close enough to answer to naturally, different enough to make searches harder. Every shift, she catalogued exits. Every interaction, she calculated risk. Every dollar earned went into the envelope hidden in her apartment's air vent, her escape fund, her lifeline, her countdown to the day she could vanish completely. Naomi. Manager Chen's voice cut through her mental checklist. She turned, careful to keep her expression neutral, professional. Chen was efficient and sharp-eyed, the kind of manager who noticed everything but said little. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" The lie came easily. It had to. Just tired. Didn't sleep well. Chen studied her for a moment too long, and Naomi fought the urge to fidget, to adjust her sleeves, to do anything that might draw attention to the carefully concealed bruises still fading on her wrists. The ribs that ached when she breathed too deeply. The hypervigilance that made sleep nearly impossible. "We need someone for VIP section tonight," Chen said finally. "Sophia called in sick. You've been here long enough. Think you can handle it?" Naomi's stomach dropped. The VIP section. Adrian Voss's territory. She'd successfully avoided it since starting, content to work the ground floor where she could blend into the background, where the stakes were lower, where powerful men didn't look at the help long enough to remember faces. But saying no meant drawing attention. Meant Chen asking questions. meant standing out when standing out could get her killed. "Of course," she said, her voice steady despite the spike of anxiety. "No problem." Chen nodded, already moving on to the next crisis. Naomi allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to close her eyes and breathe through the fear before squaring her shoulders and heading to change into the VIP server uniform, black silk instead of cotton, fitted instead of loose, designed to complement the aesthetic of wealth and danger that permeated the upper floors. She caught her reflection in the backroom mirror as she adjusted her appearance. 26 years old but feeling ancient. Dark circles she'd learned to cover with makeup. Hair pulled into a sleek bun that hid the spot where Marcus had torn out a handful 3 months ago in a rage over dinner being cold. Long sleeves despite the heat, because explaining the handprint-shaped bruises was impossible without inviting the kind of attention that got people killed. Asterisk just get through tonight. Smile. Serve. Disappear, asterisk. The VIP section smelled like expensive cologne and barely concealed violence. Naomi moved through the space with practiced efficiency, refilling drinks, clearing plates, becoming part of the furniture. She'd learned to read rooms in her year with Marcus, to sense when tension was building, when to make herself scarce, when silence was safer than speaking. Adrian Voss sat at the center of it all. She'd seen him from a distance before, of course. Impossible to work at the Lotus and not know the man who owned it. But up close, the impact was visceral. He wore power like other men wore cologne, natural, pervasive, impossible to ignore. Mid-30s, with the kind of face that photographs didn't capture properly. Sharp features. Dark eyes that tracked everything with predatory precision. Ink crawled up his neck from beneath his black shirt, tattoos that spoke of memorial and violence in equal measure. He was discussing something with his lieutenant, a man Naomi had learned to identify as Jin-soo. Their conversation flowed in Korean, words she didn't understand but tones she recognized. Business. Territory. The careful negotiation of men who solved problems with bullets rather than lawyers. Naomi approached to refill water glasses, moving with the careful quiet she'd perfected. Don't interrupt. Don't engage. Don't exist beyond the function you serve. She reached across the table, and her ribs seized. The injury was 3 months old, a kick that had cracked bone and stolen breath, delivered in the kitchen of the apartment she'd shared with Marcus over burnt toast and his conviction that she disrespected him in front of his friends. She'd escaped 2 days later with nothing but the clothes on her back and terror in her throat. The ribs had healed wrong. Dr. Google had told her that much. Without proper medical care, without the luxury of rest, the bones had knit themselves together imperfectly. Most days, she could manage the pain. But sometimes, when she moved wrong, when she reached too far, her body betrayed her. The flinch was involuntary. Barely perceptible. A tightening around her mouth, a tremor in her hand before she forced control back into her movements and finished pouring the water with steady hands. But Adrian Voss had stopped talking. The silence was sudden, absolute. Naomi felt his attention laser onto her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She didn't look at him. Couldn't. Looking meant acknowledging, and acknowledging meant being seen, and being seen meant. That will be all for now. His voice was quiet, controlled, but carried the weight of absolute authority. Naomi nodded once and retreated, every instinct screaming at her to move carefully, to not run, to not draw more attention than she'd already catastrophically attracted. She made it to the service hallway before her hands started shaking. Asterisk he noticed. He saw, asterisk. 3 months of perfect invisibility, shattered because her body had betrayed her at exactly the wrong moment in front of exactly the wrong man. Adrian Voss hadn't built an empire by missing details. Men like him survived by reading weakness, by exploiting vulnerability, by seeing what others tried to hide. Naomi pressed her forehead against the cool wall and forced herself to breathe through the panic. It was fine. It was nothing. He'd forget about one server's moment of pain. Men like him didn't care about the help. Except Marcus had cared. Marcus had noticed every tiny infraction, every perceived slight, every moment she wasn't perfect. And Adrian Voss was infinitely more dangerous than Marcus had ever been. She straightened her uniform, schooled her features into professional neutrality, and returned to the VIP section to finish her shift. But she could feel his eyes tracking her movements for the rest of the night, assessing, calculating, seeing far too much of what she desperately needed to keep hidden. The VIP section had emptied over the course of the evening until only Adrian Voss remained, along with Jin-Soo and two men Naomi didn't recognize. Their conversation had shifted from Korean to English, a territorial dispute over waterfront properties, the kind of discussion where words like negotiation meant violence and resolution meant body counts. Naomi had learned to make herself invisible during these conversations. She moved like a shadow, refilling glasses before they emptied, clearing plates with silent efficiency, existing as nothing more than background function. The trick was to be useful enough to justify presence but unremarkable enough to be forgotten. She approached the table with a fresh bottle of whiskey, the expensive kind, the label written in characters she couldn't read. Adrian's glass sat half empty, and she reached across to pour, careful not to interrupt the flow of conversation. The pain came without warning. Her ribs seized, the improperly healed bones grinding against each other in a way that stole breath and sent lightning through her torso. The flinch was involuntary, her body's betrayal, a tightening around her mouth, a tremor in her hand that made the whiskey bottle waver for just a heartbeat before she forced control back into her movements. Adrian's words died mid-sentence. The silence was immediate and absolute. Naomi felt his attention lock onto her with predatory precision, the weight of his gaze making her skin prickle with instinctive warning. She kept her eyes down, finished pouring with steady hands that cost her everything to maintain, and started to retreat. "Leave us." His voice was quiet, controlled, but carried absolute authority. Naomi froze, uncertain if the command included her, but Jin-Soo and the other men were already standing, gathering papers, moving toward the exit with the efficiency of people who knew better than to question Adrian Voss's orders. Jin-Soo paused at the door, concern flickering across his features. "The negotiation. We'll wait." Adrian's eyes never left Naomi. "Close the door behind you." The click of the door sounded like a cell locking. Naomi stood in the center of the empty VIP section, every instinct screaming at her to run, but running meant attention, meant questions, meant the kind of visibility that got people killed. She forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression neutral, to wait for whatever came next. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, seen in ways she desperately couldn't afford. The tattoos on his neck seemed darker in the dim lighting, memorial pieces for ghosts she'd never know. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Naomi Rivers, sir." The lie came automatically, practiced until it felt like truth. "How long have you worked here, Naomi?" 2 months. "And in those 2 months, have I given you any reason to be afraid of me?" The question surprised her enough that she met his eyes, dark, fathomless, dangerous but not in the way she'd expected. "No, sir." "Then why are you terrified right now?" "Because powerful men were dangerous. Because being noticed meant being vulnerable. Because the last man who'd paid her this much attention had put her in the hospital and promised to kill her if she ever left." "I'm not," she started, but he raised one hand, the gesture stopping her words as effectively as a command. "Don't lie to me." His voice remained quiet, but something lethal threaded through it. "I've built an empire on reading people, on seeing what they try to hide. You're in pain. Physical pain. And you're terrified, I've noticed." Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to deflect, to lie, to perform the carefully constructed invisibility that had kept her safe for 3 months. But Adrian Voss was looking at her like he could see straight through every defense she'd built. Who hurt you? The question landed like a physical blow. Not, are you hurt, or, what happened, he'd already assessed and concluded. He wanted names. Accountability. The kind of information that led to consequences. I'm fine, Naomi managed, but her voice wavered on the lie. Adrian stood, and despite her best efforts, Naomi took an involuntary step backward. He noticed, and something in his expression shifted, softened, almost. He stopped moving, giving her space, holding himself with the careful stillness of a predator trying not to spook prey. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, and the gentleness in his tone felt more dangerous than threats would have been. But I need you to answer my question. Who hurt you? It's nothing. An old injury. I'm just clumsy. Naomi. The way he said her name, like he was memorizing it, claiming it, made her breath catch. I've seen combat injuries. I've seen what violence looks like on a body. You're not clumsy. Someone hurt you, and they hurt you badly enough that you're still feeling it months later. How did he know it was months? How could he possibly? Your wrists, he continued, his eyes tracking to where her sleeves covered skin. You adjust them constantly. Hiding something. And the way you flinched just now wasn't about acute pain. It was old injury, improperly healed. Ribs, if I had to guess. Broken and never properly set. Naomi felt exposed, vulnerable, every carefully constructed defense crumbling under the weight of his observation. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Adrian moved to his desk, pressed a button on his phone. Dr. Kim. I need you at the Lotus. Now. He paused, listening. I don't care what you're doing. Now. That's not necessary, Naomi started, but Adrian cut her off with a look. Are you safe right now? He asked, and the question carried weight beyond the words. Is whoever hurt you still a threat? The honest answer was yes. Marcus was still out there, still connected to dangerous people, still promising to find her and make her pay for leaving. But admitting that meant admitting everything, the fake name, the running, the fear that woke her up gasping at 3 a.m. I'm handling it, she said instead. That's not what I asked. Adrian's jaw tightened, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Are you safe? I'm trying to be. The admission slipped out before she could stop it, and Naomi watched something shift in Adrian's expression, a hardening, a decision being made, the kind of calculation that came before action. While you work here, he said, his voice carrying absolute certainty, you're under my protection. That means something in this city. It means no one touches what's mine without consequences. I'm not. Naomi stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. Not his. Not anyone's. Not worth the trouble. You work for me. That makes you mine to protect. Adrian's eyes held hers, unflinching. I take care of what's mine. Always. Dr. Kim arrived 20 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with efficient movements and kind eyes that had seen too much violence to be shocked by anything. She examined Naomi in one of the private rooms, professional and thorough, while Adrian waited outside with the stillness of a man calculating murder. 3 broken ribs, healed incorrectly, Dr. Kim announced when she emerged. Extensive bruising, old defensive wounds on her arms and wrists. Signs of prolonged physical trauma over at least a year, possibly longer. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his hands curled into fists, knuckles going white. Treatment? Rest, proper pain management, monitoring. The ribs will need to be rebroken and reset if she wants them to heal properly, but that's her choice. Dr. Kim glanced toward the room where Naomi waited. She's malnourished too. Not eating enough, probably can't afford proper food. Fix it, Adrian said quietly. Whatever she needs. Send me the bill. After Dr. Kim left with prescriptions and instructions, Adrian returned to find Naomi sitting exactly where he'd left her, looking small and lost and utterly confused by everything that had happened. Why? She asked finally. Why do you care? Adrian studied her for a long moment, and Naomi saw something in his expression she didn't expect: vulnerability, recognition, an echo of pain that mirrored her own. Because I know what it looks like when someone's been hurt by people who should have protected them, he said quietly. And because you flinched in my establishment, on my watch, and that makes it my problem to solve. He moved to leave, then paused at the door. Tomorrow, you're on light duty only. Chen will adjust your schedule. Full pay. His eyes met hers, dark and unfathomable. And Naomi? You're safe now. I promise you that. Dr. Kim returned 3 days later for a follow-up examination, finding Naomi in the staff break room during her shift. The prescription pain medication had taken the edge off the constant ache in her ribs, and for the first time in months, Naomi could breathe deeply without wanting to cry. You're healing well, Dr. Kim observed, her efficient hands gentle as she checked Naomi's range of motion. Eating better too. I can tell. Naomi nodded, not mentioning that Chen had quietly informed her that staff meals were now complimentary, a policy change that had gone into effect exactly 3 days ago, affecting only Naomi as far as she could tell. She'd eaten more in the past 72 hours than she had in the previous 2 weeks combined. Dr. Kim packed her medical bag with practiced efficiency, then paused, studying Naomi with eyes that had seen too much to miss anything. Adrian doesn't usually involve himself like this, she said quietly. In 15 years of treating his people, I've never seen him personally arrange care for anyone outside his inner circle. The observation landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through Naomi's carefully maintained equilibrium. She didn't know how to respond, so she said nothing, and Dr. Kim smiled, knowing, almost sympathetic. Just be careful, the doctor said as she left. Men like Adrian Voss don't do anything halfway. Naomi discovered the truth of that statement over the next 2 weeks. Adrian was everywhere. Not obviously. Not intrusively. But present in a way that made Naomi hyper-aware of every movement, every breath, every moment she existed in his space. When she was assigned to restock the bar, he materialized to review inventory logs at the corner table, reading documents with the same intense focus he applied to everything. When she worked the ground floor restaurant, he appeared to meet with associates, choosing tables in her section with what seemed like coincidence but felt like intention. He never spoke beyond brief professional exchanges. A nod when she refilled his coffee. A quiet, thank you, that felt weighted with meaning she couldn't quite decipher. But his eyes tracked her movements with predatory precision, cataloging everything, the way she moved with less pain now, the improved color in her cheeks, the moment she forgot to be invisible and actually smiled at something Chen said. The protection was subtle but absolute. Naomi noticed how other patrons were quietly redirected away from her tables when they seemed too drunk, too aggressive, too interested. How security appeared whenever she took out trash or worked late. How the walk to her car at the end of shifts was always somehow monitored, even if she couldn't see the watchers. It should have felt oppressive. Instead, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Naomi felt safe. She started researching Adrian Voss on her nights off, sitting in her apartment with her laptop and a growing sense of vertigo. The internet painted him in shadows and speculation, a ghost who controlled half the city's underground economy, whose name made hardened criminals go quiet, whose reputation was built on ruthless efficiency and the kind of violence that left no witnesses. There were articles about territorial wars he'd won, rivals who'd disappeared, a criminal empire built from nothing into something that made law enforcement look the other way because prosecuting him was suicide, professional and possibly literal. Photos showed him at charity galas and exclusive events, looking elegant and dangerous in expensive suits, surrounded by the city's elite who knew exactly what he was and courted his favor anyway. One article mentioned his younger sister, dead at 19 in a violent incident 15 years ago. No details, just a footnote in a larger story about gang violence and territorial disputes. Naomi found herself staring at that single line, remembering the memorial tattoos she'd glimpsed on his neck and arms, understanding suddenly why he looked at her with recognition. He knew what it was like to be powerless against violence. She should have been terrified. Should have run. Should have taken her escape fund and disappeared into some other city where Korean mafia bosses didn't notice when servers flinched. Instead, she found herself watching for him during shifts, her pulse quickening when he entered a room, her skin prickling with awareness whenever his eyes found hers across the space. It happened on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after Dr. Kim's first examination. Naomi was shelving wine bottles in the storage room, light duty, as promised, when Adrian appeared in the doorway. She hadn't heard him approach, and the surprise made her fumble the bottle in her hands. He caught it before it could fall, his reflexes inhumanly fast, his hand brushing hers as he steadied the glass. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Naomi felt it like an electric current, her breath catching at the warmth of his skin against hers. "Careful," he said quietly, and his voice carried something she couldn't quite name, concern, maybe, or something deeper, more dangerous. "Thank you." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Adrian didn't move away immediately. Instead, he studied the wine label with apparent interest, though Naomi suspected he could recite the entire inventory from memory. "You're moving better," he observed. "Less pain?" "Yes. The medication helps. And eating regularly." She paused, then added, "Thank you for that too. For all of it. You don't need to thank me for basic human decency. In my experience, basic human decency is rarer than you'd think." Something flickered across his expression, anger, but not directed at her. "The person who hurt you," he said carefully, "do they know you're here?" Naomi's throat tightened. She'd been waiting for this question, dreading it, knowing it would come eventually. "I don't think so. I'm careful. Different name, cash only, no social media. I've been careful. But you're not sure." "I can't be sure. He has connections. Friends and places that make searching for people easier." She forced herself to meet Adrian's eyes. "That's why I'm saving. To disappear properly when I have enough." Adrian's jaw tightened, and Naomi watched him make some internal calculation, reaching a decision that changed the energy in the room. "What's your favorite book?" he asked suddenly. The question was so unexpected that Naomi blinked. "What? Favorite book? Music? Food? Something real?" His eyes held hers, intense and fathomless. "I know you're in pain, that you're running, that you're scared. I don't know anything about who you are beyond survival. Why do you want to know?" "Because you're more than what was done to you." He said it with absolute certainty, as if the statement was fact rather than opinion. "And I want to know who you are when you're not just trying to stay alive." Naomi felt something crack in her chest, a defense she'd maintained for so long it had become part of her structure. "Jane Eyre," she said quietly. "The book. I've read it maybe 20 times. And jazz. Old recordings, the kind where you can hear the crackle of vinyl. And I used to love cooking before." She stopped, the sentence trailing into silence. "Before it became dangerous to get things wrong," Adrian finished, his voice carrying understanding that made her eyes burn. "Yes." They stood in the storage room surrounded by wine bottles and the weight of things unsaid, and Naomi realized that somehow, without her noticing, she'd started to trust this dangerous man with the memorial tattoos and eyes that saw too much. "You're safe here," Adrian said again, the same promise he'd made 2 weeks ago, but this time it felt different, personal rather than professional, a vow rather than a statement. While you're under my protection, nothing touches you. No one hurts you. I swear it. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why do you care what happens to me? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and Naomi watched emotions flicker across his features too quickly to catalog. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, honest in a way that felt like exposure. Because when you flinched, I saw my sister. Saw myself at 19, powerless to stop violence I should have prevented. And I decided that I'd never be powerless again. His eyes met hers, dark and unfathomable. You flinched in my establishment, on my watch. That makes you mine to protect. And I protect what's mine with everything I have. He left before Naomi could respond, disappearing as silently as he'd arrived, leaving her standing among wine bottles with her heart racing and the certainty that everything had just shifted into something far more dangerous than simple employer concern. The violence erupted without warning on a Friday night when the Lotus was at capacity, the ground-floor restaurant full of oblivious diners, the second-floor club pulsing with music and expensive bodies, the third-floor VIP section hosting the kind of meetings where fortunes changed hands and empires shifted on handshakes. Naomi was clearing tables on the ground floor when she heard the commotion, raised voices near the entrance, the distinctive click of safeties being released, the sudden silence that came before bloodshed. Chen appeared at her elbow, his face pale, his hand gripping her arm with unexpected strength. Back room. Now. But Naomi had frozen, her eyes locked on the group of men forcing their way past security. 6 of them, armed, radiating the kind of casual violence that came from never facing consequences. The leader, a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, was speaking loudly in Russian-accented English about respect and territory and messages that needed to be delivered. Adrian materialized from the stairway leading to the VIP section. He didn't rush. Didn't shout. Simply appeared with Jin-Soo and 2 other men flanking him, moving with the controlled precision of predators who'd never doubted their position at the top of the food chain. Naomi watched the shift in the room, how conversations died, how patrons suddenly found reasons to study their plates, how even the Russian crew's bravado faltered when Adrian's attention locked onto their leader. You're disrupting my establishment, Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying despite the lack of volume. I don't appreciate disruptions. The scarred man laughed, but it sounded forced. We're here to discuss your expansion into territories that don't belong to you, Voss. Viktor Kozlov sends his regards and suggests you reconsider your recent acquisitions. Tell Viktor Kozlov that I don't negotiate with men too cowardly to deliver threats personally. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something lethal threaded through his words. You have 30 seconds to leave my establishment before I demonstrate why that's a wise decision. You think you can? The scarred man didn't finish his sentence. Adrian moved with inhuman speed, closing the distance and driving his fist into the man's solar plexus with surgical precision. The man dropped, gasping, and chaos erupted. Naomi should have looked away. Should have run to the back room like Chen had instructed. Instead, she watched, horrified and mesmerized, as Adrian dismantled the Russian crew with efficient brutality. He moved like violence was a language he'd been speaking since birth, each strike calculated for maximum impact, each movement economical and devastating. Jin-Soo and the others handled the remaining men with similar efficiency, but it was Adrian who commanded attention, cold, controlled, terrifying in his absolute competence. When it was over, less than 2 minutes after it had begun, the Russian crew was on the floor bleeding or unconscious, and Adrian stood untouched except for bloodied knuckles and a slight tear in his expensive shirt. Get them out, he told Jin-Soo, his voice steady despite the violence. Send them back to Victor with a message. My territories stay mine. The next crew he sends, I send back in pieces. His eyes swept the room, cataloging witnesses, ensuring order, and then they landed on Naomi. She expected to see a monster. Expected to feel the fear that Marcus had instilled in her, the certainty that men who used violence were men to run from, that brutality meant danger, that she should be terrified. Instead, she felt safe. It made no sense. Adrian had just beaten 6 men with his bare hands, had threatened dismemberment with the same tone someone might use to order coffee, had demonstrated exactly why he was feared throughout the city's underworld. But Naomi looked at him standing there with blood on his knuckles and saw only protection, the kind of absolute safety that came from knowing no one would dare hurt her while she stood under his watch. Their eyes held for a moment that stretched too long, something passing between them that Naomi didn't have words for, and then Adrian turned away, disappearing up the stairs to the VIP section while his men cleaned up the aftermath. The Lotus returned to normal with disturbing speed. Patrons resumed conversations as if witnessing violence was simply part of the ambience. Chen ushered Naomi to the back room with shaking hands and instructions to take the rest of the night off, paid. But Naomi couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without understanding why watching Adrian Voss brutalize 6 men had made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. She found him an hour later on the 3rd floor, alone in his private office. The door was ajar, and through the gap she could see him standing at the window overlooking the city, his shirt discarded, the memorial tattoos on his back and arms visible in the low light. His knuckles were bandaged, Dr. Kim's work, probably, but his shoulders carried tension that spoke of more than physical pain. Naomi knocked softly. "May I come in?" Adrian turned, and the surprise on his face gave way to something more complex, concern, maybe, or fear that she'd finally seen him for what he was and would run. "You should be home," Chen said. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." The laugh that escaped him was bitter, humorless. "You're checking on me? After watching me beat 6 men unconscious?" "Yes." Naomi stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "You're bleeding." "It's not my blood. Your knuckles are split. I can see it through the bandages." Adrian looked down at his hands as if noticing the damage for the first time. "Hazard of the profession. Does it happen often? The violence?" "Often enough." He returned his attention to the window, his profile sharp in the city lights. "Does it scare you? What you saw?" "It should," Naomi admitted. "I spent a year with a man who used his fists to control me. I should be terrified of you. But you're not." "No." She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "When I watched you tonight, I didn't see Marcus. I saw someone protecting what's his. Someone who would never let anyone hurt me the way I've been hurt." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You barely know me, Naomi. You don't know what I'm capable of. I know you got Dr. Kim to treat me when you didn't have to. I know you changed my duties so I could heal. I know you've been watching over me for 2 weeks, making sure I'm safe, making sure I eat. I know," she stopped, emotion catching in her throat. "I know you see me. Really see me. Not just what was done to me, but who I am. My sister was 19 when she died." Adrian's voice was rough, the words coming like a confession. "May. She was brilliant, kind, everything good in the world. I was just starting out then, trying to build something, trying to make enough money to get us out of the situation we were in. I made enemies. Made the wrong people angry. And they took her to punish me." Naomi's chest tightened. "Adrian. They left her in an alley like trash." His hands curled into fists despite the damaged knuckles. "I found her. I held her while she died, and I was completely powerless to save her. 15 years ago, and I can still feel how cold she got, how the light left her eyes while I begged her to hold on. I'm so sorry. I've spent 15 years making sure I'm never powerless again." Adrian turned to face her fully, and Naomi saw a raw pain in his expression, the kind that never fully healed, that shaped everything that came after. Building power, eliminating threats, becoming someone so dangerous that no one would dare take from me again. And then you flinched, and I saw May. Saw myself at 19, unable to protect what mattered. Naomi understood then, the obsessive protection, the careful vigilance, the way he'd inserted himself into her life with absolute certainty. She was a second chance at redemption he'd never expected to get. His name was Marcus Webb, she heard herself say. We dated for 8 months before he hit me the first time. He apologized, said it would never happen again. It happened again 3 days later. And then it kept happening until I couldn't remember what it felt like to not be afraid. Adrian's expression darkened, but he didn't interrupt. He isolated me from friends, from family. Made me believe I deserved it, that I was the problem. The night I left, he broke 3 of my ribs and told me he'd kill me if I ever tried to escape. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing the faded bruises on her wrists. These are from when he held me down. And these, she touched her ribs, are from his boots. Adrian moved before she could react, his hands gentle as they took her wrist, his fingers tracing the bruises with devastating tenderness. Does he know where you are? I don't think so. But he's looking. He has connections, friends who can find people. That's why I'm saving to disappear properly. You don't need to disappear. Adrian's eyes met hers, dark and certain. You're under my protection now. If he comes looking, he'll find me instead. You can't promise that. You don't know what he's capable of. I know exactly what men like him are capable of. Adrian's thumb brushed across her pulse point, and Naomi shivered at the contact. And I promise you, Naomi, I'm capable of infinitely worse. He won't touch you. Ever again. The certainty in his voice should have been terrifying. Instead, Naomi felt something inside her chest crack open, a defense she'd maintained for so long it had become part of her structure. Why do you care this much? I'm no one. Just a server trying to survive. You're not no one. Adrian said it like fact, like truth carved in stone. You remind me that there's still something worth protecting in this world. That not everything has to be about power and violence and revenge. You make me remember what it felt like to care about something other than empire. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and raw, and Naomi realized they were standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could count the memorial flowers tattooed across his collarbone. I should go, she whispered, but made no move to leave. You should, Adrian agreed, but his hand was still gentle on her wrist, his thumb still tracing patterns that made her breath catch. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched, charged with possibility and danger and the recognition that whatever was building between them had just become inevitable. Finally, Adrian released her wrist and stepped back, and Naomi felt the loss like a physical ache. Let Jin-Soo drive you home, he said quietly. And Naomi? Thank you for checking on me. No one's done that in a very long time. Chapter 5. Naomi was restocking bar inventory when her phone buzzed with a text from Chen, *, need you in my office. Now, *. The urgency in those 3 words sent ice through her veins. She abandoned the wine bottles and moved quickly through the establishment, her mind cataloging every possible disaster. Had she made a mistake? Broken some unspoken rule? Was this when everything she'd carefully built came crashing down? Chen's office door was open, but Adrian stood inside instead of the manager, his attention fixed on the security monitor. Jin-Soo flanked him, along with 2 other men Naomi recognized from Adrian's inner circle. The tension in the room was suffocating. Close the door, Adrian said without looking away from the screen. His voice was controlled, but Naomi heard the rage underneath, cold, lethal, barely contained. She did as instructed, her hands trembling. What happened? Adrian finally turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. A man came to the establishment an hour ago. Demanded to see you. Claimed you stole from him and that you belonged to him. He pressed a button, and the security footage began to play. Naomi's world tilted. Marcus filled the screen, older, harder than she remembered, his face twisted with the familiar rage that had preceded so much pain. He was shouting at security, gesturing aggressively, his body language radiating ownership and fury. Even through the silent footage, Naomi could read his lips, *, she's mine. I want what's mine, *. We detained him before he could enter, Jin-Soo said, his tone professional but his eyes sympathetic. But he made threats. Said he knew people. That he'd burn this place down to get to you. Naomi's legs gave out. She caught herself on the edge of Chen's desk, her ribs seizing with phantom pain, her body remembering every moment of Marcus's violence with visceral clarity. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll leave. I'll go tonight. I never meant to bring this to you. You're not going anywhere. Adrian's voice cut through her panic like a blade. He is. You don't understand. He has connections. Friends in the Volkov organization. If he tells them I'm here, if he makes this an issue. The Volkov organization. Adrian's expression turned calculating, dangerous. Viktor Kozlov's crew. Naomi nodded, nausea churning in her stomach. Marcus did work for them. Security, enforcement. He bragged about it, about the people he knew, the things he could do if I ever tried to leave. Her hands were shaking. That's why I changed my name. Why I've been so careful. I knew if they helped him look, they'd find me. Adrian was silent for a long moment, and Naomi watched him process this information with terrifying calm. When he finally spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. Tell me everything. From the beginning. No omissions. Adrian. Everything, Naomi. So she told him. About meeting Marcus at a bar 2 years ago, charming and attentive, sweeping her off her feet with attention she'd mistaken for love. About the first hit, a slap over burnt dinner, and his tearful apology. About how the violence escalated until she was walking on eggshells, terrified of triggering his rage, isolated from everyone who might have helped her escape. She told him about the night 8 months ago when Marcus had beaten her so badly she genuinely believed she was going to die. About his boot in her ribs, his hands around her throat, his promise that he'd kill her if she ever left him. About waiting until he passed out drunk 2 nights later and running with nothing but the clothes on her back and $300 stolen from his wallet. I've been moving every few weeks, she said, her voice hollow. New apartments, cash only, different name. I thought I'd been careful enough. I thought, her voice broke. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. He's threatening what's mine. Adrian's tone was lethal, final. That's a mistake people don't survive. You can't start a war over me. I'm not worth. Adrian moved before she could finish, crossing the space between them with predatory speed. His hands framed her face with devastating gentleness, forcing her to meet his eyes. Don't you dare tell me what you're worth. Don't you dare. But the Volkov organization has been a problem for months anyway. This just accelerates the timeline. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and Naomi realized she was crying. Did you really think I'd let him take you? That I'd hand you over to avoid conflict? I don't want you to get hurt because of me. Naomi. The way he said her name, like a prayer, like a promise, made her chest ache. I've been preparing for war with Viktor Kozlov since he sent those men to intimidate me 3 weeks ago. Your Marcus just gave me the perfect excuse to finish what he started. Why would you risk that? Why would you risk everything over? Because you've become the most important thing in my world, and I don't even know how it happened. The confession came out raw, honest, stripped of every defense. You flinched, and I saw something worth protecting. You healed, and I saw something worth caring for. You looked at me after watching me brutalize 6 men, and you weren't afraid, you felt safe. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Naomi couldn't breathe. Couldn't think beyond the intensity in his eyes, the gentleness of his hands on her face, the certainty in his voice. I've spent 15 years building walls, Adrian continued, his voice rough with emotion. Making myself untouchable, unkillable, alone. And then you walked into my establishment with your careful invisibility and your hidden pain, and every wall I built started crumbling. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something other than revenge and empire. Adrian. I want to kill him. His jaw tightened, rage flickering across his features. I want to make Marcus Webb suffer for every bruise, every broken bone, every moment of fear he put you through. I want him to understand exactly what it costs to hurt what belongs to me. I don't belong to anyone. The protest was automatic, defensive. No. Adrian's thumbs traced her cheekbones again, the touch achingly gentle. You don't belong to anyone. But you're mine to protect. Mine to care for. Mine to, he stopped, something vulnerable crossing his expression. If you'll let me. If you want this. Want me, despite what I am. Naomi looked at him, this dangerous man with memorial tattoos and blood on his hands, who'd shown her more care in 3 weeks than Marcus had in 2 years, who made her feel safe instead of scared, who was offering to go to war to keep her protected. She should run. Should disappear into the night before his world consumed her completely. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. The kiss was desperate, claiming, full of weeks of building tension and denied attraction. Adrian's hands tightened on her face, pulling her closer, kissing her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Naomi's hands fisted in his shirt, feeling the solid warmth of him, the leashed power in his body, the way he trembled slightly like he was afraid she'd disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. Tell me you want this, he said quietly. Tell me you're choosing this, choosing me, with full knowledge of what I am and what I'm capable of. I want this. Naomi's voice was steady despite her racing heart. I want you. I'm terrified and it makes no sense and I should run, but I want this. I'll keep you safe. His hands slid to her waist, holding her like she was something precious. I swear on May's memory, Naomi. No one touches you. Not Marcus, not the Volkov organization, not anyone. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. What are you going to do? Adrian's expression turned cold, calculating. Handle it. Permanently. Marcus Webb made a fatal mistake when he came to my establishment making threats. Viktor Kozlov made an even bigger one by enabling him. His eyes met hers, dark and certain. By tomorrow night, you'll never have to fear either of them again. Don't kill him. Naomi's hand pressed against Adrian's chest, feeling his heartbeat. Please. I don't want that weight on my conscience. Then I won't kill him. Adrian's promise was immediate, absolute. But he'll wish I had by the time I'm finished. He kissed her again, softer this time, tender despite the violence simmering beneath his controlled exterior. When he pulled back, his eyes held promises and threats in equal measure. Go home, he said quietly. Jin-Soo will drive you and stay outside your apartment. I have work to do. Adrian. Trust me, Naomi. I've been preparing for this kind of war my entire life. And I've never had better motivation to win. He was right. By tomorrow night, everything would change. Naomi just didn't realize how completely. Naomi spent 36 hours in her apartment with Jinsu stationed outside like a silent guardian, her phone clutched in her hand, jumping at every sound. She tried to sleep but her mind conjured images of violence, Adrian bleeding, Adrian hurt, Adrian paying for protecting her with his life. The rational part of her brain knew he'd survived 15 years in the underworld by being smarter and more ruthless than his enemies. The part that was falling for him couldn't stop imagining worst-case scenarios. Dr. Kim appeared on the second morning with prescriptions Naomi didn't need and eyes that saw too much. "He'll be fine," she said quietly, checking Naomi's healing ribs with professional efficiency. "Adrian Voss doesn't lose. Not when he's fighting for something that matters." "How do you know what he's doing?" "Because I've been patching up his enemies for 15 years, and I've never seen him this focused." Dr. Kim's smile was knowing, almost sympathetic. "You're good for him. He's been dead inside since May. You make him remember he's human." After she left, Naomi paced her small apartment, her phone silent, her imagination running wild with possibilities. She researched the Volkov organization, found articles about Viktor Kozlov's expanding territory, his reputation for brutal retaliation, the body count that followed disagreements with his crew. She thought about Marcus, about his connections to these dangerous men, about what Adrian was risking to keep her safe. She thought about running. Taking her escape fund and disappearing before the violence caught up to her. But the thought of leaving Adrian, of never seeing him again, never knowing if he survived, was physically painful in a way that terrified her. At 2 a.m. on the second night, her apartment door opened. Naomi was off the couch before conscious thought, her heart hammering, until she saw Adrian in the doorway. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, tension in his shoulders, his expensive clothes rumpled in ways that suggested he'd been wearing them for days. His knuckles were bandaged, blood seeping through the gauze despite obvious attempts at cleaning up. "It's done," he said quietly, and his voice carried the weight of finality. Naomi crossed the space between them, her hands reaching for his face, cataloging damage. A cut above his eyebrow, bruising along his jaw, the exhaustion that went bone deep. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal." Adrian caught her hands gently, holding them against his chest. "Marcus Webb is on a plane to Seattle with new identification and $10,000. He has clear understanding that returning east of the Mississippi means death. Painfully slow death. He's alive?" Relief and something more complex flooded through her. "You asked me not to kill him. So I didn't." Adrian's jaw tightened. "But I made certain he understands the consequences of ever coming near you again. And I sent photographs of our conversation to Viktor Kozlov with a message about what happens to people who threaten what's mine." Naomi's breath caught. "The Volkov organization is no longer a problem." Adrian's eyes were dark, fathomless. "Viktor and I reached an understanding. He disavows Marcus's actions, I don't expand into his northern territories, and we both pretend this was about business rather than you. It's done, Naomi. You're safe." The words didn't fully register at first. Safe. A concept so foreign she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. No more running. No more looking over her shoulder. No more fear that Marcus would appear and drag her back to that nightmare. The sob that escaped her was unexpected, raw. Tears she'd been holding back for 36 hours, for 3 months, for 2 years, finally breaking through. Adrian pulled her against his chest immediately, his arms wrapping around her with careful strength, mindful of her still healing ribs. "You're safe," he repeated, his voice rough against her hair. "I swear it. I'd burn this entire city down before I let anyone hurt you again." Naomi believed him. That was the terrifying part. She absolutely believed he would commit atrocities to keep her protected, and instead of horror, she felt cherished. "What did you do?" she asked against his chest. "To make Marcus leave," to make Viktor Kozlov back down? Things you don't need to carry. Adrian's hands moved gently up her spine. I'm not a good man, Naomi. I've done terrible things to build my empire, to survive, to protect what matters. But I'm trying to be good for you. She pulled back enough to look at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath the exhaustion, the fear that she'd finally see him as the monster he believed himself to be. You went to war for me. I'd go to war for you again tomorrow if necessary. Why? The question was a whisper. Why would you risk everything? Because I love you. The confession came out raw, unplanned, stripped of every defense. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you flinched and I saw something worth protecting. Maybe when you looked at me after I brutalized those men and felt safe instead of scared. Maybe when you came to check on me instead of running. But it happened, and now I can't imagine my world without you in it. Naomi's heart stuttered. You love me. Yes. Adrian's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears. I love you. And I know it's insane, we barely know each other, I'm dangerous, my world is violent and dark and nothing you deserve. But it's true anyway. I love you too. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating and inevitable. I shouldn't. It makes no sense. But I do. Adrian kissed her then, desperate, claiming, pouring weeks of denied want into the contact. Naomi responded with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, feeling the solid warmth of him, the proof that he'd survived, that he'd come back to her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to disappoint you, he said quietly. I'm going to make decisions you don't agree with, do things that horrify you, be the monster people say I am. I can't promise to be good. I can only promise to try, for you. I don't need you to be good. Naomi's hand slid up to his neck, feeling his pulse race beneath her fingers. I need you to be honest. To keep me safe. To choose me even when it's complicated. Always. His hands tightened on her waist. You're mine now, Naomi. And I protect what's mine with everything I have. The possessiveness in his voice should have triggered every defense, every lesson learned from Marcus's ownership. Instead, it felt different, protective rather than controlling, claiming rather than imprisoning. Adrian was offering safety wrapped in devotion, protection earned through violence committed in her name. She kissed him again, and this time it was different, less desperate, more deliberate. A choice rather than a reaction. When she pulled back and took his hand, leading him toward her bedroom, Adrian's eyes darkened with want and something deeper. Are you sure? He asked, even as he followed. I'm sure. Naomi turned to face him at the bedroom door, her heart racing but her voice steady. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. All of you, including the parts that scare me. What happened next was tender despite the violence Adrian had committed hours before. He undressed her slowly, carefully, his eyes cataloging every fading bruise with barely contained rage before his lips followed, kissing each mark as if he could heal them through devotion alone. When Naomi reached for his clothes, he let her see the memorial tattoos that covered his torso, flowers for May, dates and names of people lost, artwork that told stories of survival and loss. You're beautiful, she whispered, tracing the ink across his chest. I'm damaged. So am I. She met his eyes. Maybe we can be damaged together. Adrian made love to her like she was something precious, something worth protecting, something that mattered more than empire or power or revenge. And when it was over, when they lay tangled together in the pre-dawn darkness, Naomi felt safer than she had in years, possibly ever. She woke hours later to find Adrian watching her, his expression soft in ways that transformed his features from dangerous to almost vulnerable. How long have you been awake? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. A while. His hand moved gently through her hair. I was making sure you're real. That this is real. It's real. Naomi pressed closer, feeling his warmth, his solid presence. We're real. You're mine now, Adrian said quietly, the words carrying promise and threat in equal measure. I protect what's mine. Always. No matter what it costs. Naomi believed him. And somewhere in the safety of his arms, surrounded by evidence of violence committed in her name, she finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved protection. Deserved care. Deserved love, even from a monster who was trying to be a man for her. I'm yours, she whispered against his chest. And you're mine. Adrian's arms tightened around her, and Naomi felt his heartbeat steady beneath her palm, proof of life, proof of survival, proof that sometimes love emerged from the darkest places and became something worth fighting for. Naomi moved through those days in a haze of unprecedented safety and cautious happiness. She'd moved into Adrian's penthouse after the second week, not because he demanded it, but because waking up without him felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. The Lotus had become more than just her workplace, it had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. Adrian was attentive without being controlling, protective without being possessive in the toxic ways Marcus had been. He encouraged her to reconnect with the few friends she'd lost contact with during her relationship with Marcus. He insisted she keep her own bank account, her own money, her own autonomy. He made her feel safe while ensuring she never felt owned. She should have known it was too perfect to last. The kidnapping happened on a Thursday afternoon. Naomi had insisted on running to her old apartment to collect the last of her belongings, books mostly, a few sentimental items she'd hidden from Marcus. Jin-Soo had offered to accompany her, but she'd waved him off, needing just an hour of normalcy, of independence, of proving to herself that she could exist in the world without constant protection. She was locking her apartment door, a box of books balanced on her hip, when the van pulled up. 3 men emerged with professional efficiency, no dramatics, no threats, just calculated violence. A cloth over her mouth, the sharp chemical smell of chloroform, her vision tunneling to black before she could scream. She woke in darkness. Not complete darkness, a sliver of light beneath what she assumed was a door, enough to make out concrete walls, a metal chair she was zip-tied to, the cold that seeped through her clothes and into her bones. Her head throbbed where it had hit something during the kidnapping, and her ribs ached with phantom pain that made breathing difficult. Adrian will come, the thought was automatic, certain. He'll find me. The door opened, fluorescent light flooding the space and making her squint. The man who entered was older than Adrian, maybe 50, with the kind of face that had seen too much violence to be shocked by anything. Viktor Kozlov. She recognized him from her frantic research weeks ago. Naomi Reed, he said, his Russian accent thick but his English perfect. Or should I say Naomi Rivers? Such a simple deception, yet it worked for months. You're very good at hiding. Naomi said nothing. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to not give him anything he could use. Your Adrian Voss is quite protective of you, Viktor continued, circling her slowly. A weakness I didn't expect from him. Men like us don't usually allow ourselves such vulnerabilities. He pulled out a phone, snapped a photo of Naomi tied to the chair, her face pale but defiant. Let's see how much you're worth to him. Adrian was in a meeting with Jin-Soo and his financial advisor when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, the discussion about laundering protocols required his full attention. But something made him look. The photo loaded slowly. Naomi. Tied to a chair. Terrified but unharmed. The message below was brief, * your territories for your woman. You have 24 hours, *. The phone shattered in his hand. Jin-Soo was moving before Adrian spoke, already on his own phone, already mobilizing security. The financial advisor had the good sense to leave immediately, understanding that whatever was about to happen wasn't meant for civilian eyes. Find her. Adrian's voice was cold, controlled, absolutely lethal. Now. Within 20 minutes, his inner circle assembled in the penthouse: Jin-soo, his head of security Dae-young, his technology specialist Hannah, and 3 of his most trusted enforcers. Adrian stood at the head of the table, every inch the crime lord who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and precision. Viktor Kozlov has Naomi, he said without preamble. He's demanding I cede territories in exchange for her safe return. We have less than 24 hours. What are you going to do? Jin-soo asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. I don't negotiate. I eliminate. Adrian's eyes swept the room. Hannah, I need locations. Every property Kozlov owns, every warehouse, every safe house. Dae-young, full tactical team, best weapons, body armor, whatever we need. Jin-soo. I'm with you, Jin-soo said immediately. The planning took 3 hours. Hannah narrowed down 17 possible locations to 3 high-probability sites based on security camera footage tracking the van's route. Dae-young assembled a team of 12, men who'd proven their loyalty through blood and violence. Adrian reviewed the tactical plans with cold precision, marking exit points and vulnerable positions with the detachment of someone planning a business acquisition rather than a rescue mission. It was Jin-soo who noticed Min-jun's absence. Where is he? He should be here for this. Adrian's expression didn't change, but everyone in the room felt the temperature drop. Min-jun won't be joining us. Why not? Because he's the one who told Viktor about Naomi's importance. Adrian's voice carried absolute certainty. He's been feeding information to Kozlov for months. The timing of this kidnapping, the knowledge of her routines, the fact that my security detail was scheduled to be elsewhere, it required inside information. Jin-soo's face went pale. How long have you known? Since the moment I received that photo. Min-jun was the only one outside this room who knew Naomi was going to her apartment today. Adrian pulled up security footage on the large screen, Min-jun in a parking garage, talking to one of Viktor's known associates, money changing hands. Hannah traced his communications an hour ago. He's been compromised for 6 months. Where is he now? Basement. He won't be a problem anymore. No one asked for clarification. They didn't need to. Naomi had been in the concrete room for what felt like hours when she heard gunfire. Distant at first, then closer, the distinctive crack of assault rifles, shouting in Russian and Korean, the sounds of violence filtering through walls and making her heart race with hope and terror in equal measure. Viktor had left guards, 2 men who looked more nervous with each passing gunshot. The door exploded inward. Adrian appeared in the opening like an avenging angel, covered in blood that clearly wasn't his, an assault rifle in his hands, his expression absolutely feral. His eyes found Naomi immediately, cataloging her condition in a heartbeat, alive, unharmed, terrified but whole. The relief that crossed his features lasted maybe 2 seconds before rage replaced it. He killed the guards with efficiency that was almost beautiful. 2 shots, center mass, both men dropping before they could raise their weapons. Then he was crossing the space, a knife appearing in his hand to cut through her zip ties with practiced precision. Are you hurt? His hands moved over her body, checking for injuries with gentle urgency that contrasted sharply with the violence he'd just committed. No. Scared, but not hurt. Naomi's voice shook. Adrian. I've got you. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her ribs, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. I've got you. You're safe now. Gunfire erupted again, closer now. Adrian positioned himself between Naomi and the door, his body a shield, his weapon raised. Jin-soo appeared in the doorway, blood splattered across his face, his expression grim. Buildings clear except for Viktor. He's barricaded in the north room. Adrian's jaw tightened. Get Naomi to the car. Dae-young will escort you back to the penthouse. No. Naomi's hand gripped his arm. Don't leave me. Please. He looked at her, and Naomi saw the war in his eyes, the need for revenge versus the need to keep her safe. Finally, he nodded to Jin-soo. Bring Victor to me. Alive. They dragged Victor into the room 5 minutes later, bloodied but conscious, his earlier confidence replaced with the dawning understanding that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Adrian had positioned Naomi behind him, shielding her from the worst of what was about to happen, but she could still see Victor's face when he recognized his error. You don't threaten what's mine, Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying more menace than any shout. You don't touch her. You don't use her as leverage. You don't even think her name without consequences. Adrian, please, Victor started, but Adrian's expression stopped the words. I'm going to let you live, Adrian continued, because killing you triggers a war that puts Naomi at risk. But you're going to leave this city tonight. You're going to dismantle your operations here and never return. And you're going to spread the word that Naomi is under my absolute protection. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, or even looks at her wrong will face what you face tonight multiplied by 1,000. Victor nodded frantically, blood running from his broken nose. Yes. Yes, I understand. Good. Adrian gestured to Jin-soo. Get him out of my sight. After Victor was removed, after the building was secured and the cleanup crews called, Adrian finally turned back to Naomi. The rage had faded, leaving behind exhaustion and something that looked like fear. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry my world touched you. I'm sorry loving me put you in danger. Naomi stepped into his space, her hands framing his blood-splattered face. You came for me. Always. I'll always come for you. Then that's all that matters. She kissed him, tasting copper and smoke and violence, choosing him anyway. Take me home. Adrian gathered her carefully, carrying her out of the warehouse and into the waiting car, leaving behind the evidence of what he'd done to save her, the bodies, the blood, the brutal reminder that loving Adrian Voss meant accepting the monster along with the man. Adrian had kept Naomi close during those 72 hours, barely letting her out of his sight, waking from nightmares where he arrived too late, where Victor's threats became reality, where he lost the one thing in his world that mattered more than empire. She'd held him through the worst of it, understanding that the terror he felt wasn't weakness but proof that he was still human beneath the armor. But Victor's continued existence was a problem. Word had spread through the underworld about the kidnapping, about Adrian's response, about the weakness that loving someone created. Other rivals were watching, calculating, wondering if they could exploit the same vulnerability. Adrian couldn't allow that calculation to continue. I have to finish this, he told Naomi on the third morning, his voice rough from lack of sleep. Victor's alive, and that's a liability. To you. To us. To everything I've built. Naomi looked at him from across the breakfast table in his penthouse, her eyes clear and knowing. You're going to kill him. Yes. No point in lying. Not to her. Will it keep me safe? It will send a message. That touching you has consequences beyond negotiation or mercy. His hands tightened on his coffee cup. That you're not leverage. You're untouchable. She was quiet for a long moment, and Adrian waited for the horror, the rejection, the moment she realized what loving him truly meant. Instead, Naomi reached across the table and took his hand. Then do what you need to do. Just come back to me. He did. But the cost was written in blood. Viktor Kozlov died in his exile apartment in Philadelphia, a single bullet to the head, clean and efficient, the kind of execution that left no doubt about the message. Adrian had done it personally, refusing to delegate this particular piece of violence, needing Victor to see his face and understand exactly why he was dying. The return trip took 6 hours. 6 hours for Adrian to sit with what he'd done, to catalog the blood on his hands, literal and metaphorical, to wonder if this was finally the moment Naomi would see him as the monster everyone said he was and run. He entered the penthouse just after midnight, expecting darkness. Instead, he found Naomi curled on the sofa, a book abandoned in her lap, her eyes tracking to him the moment he opened the door. She took in his appearance, the blood splatter he'd tried to clean off but couldn't completely erase, the exhaustion etched in every line of his body, the violence that clung to him like cologne. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. "Yes." Adrian stayed by the door, giving her space to process, to react, to decide if this was too much. "Viktor Kozlov is dead. I killed him. Put a bullet in his head and watched him bleed out on expensive carpet." Naomi stood, setting the book aside, and crossed the space between them. Adrian watched her approach, every muscle tense, waiting for the flinch that would break him, for the fear that would prove he'd damned her by loving her. Instead, she reached up and cupped his face, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones with devastating tenderness. "You came back to me. I'll always come back to you. I know." She studied his face, seeing everything, the violence, the exhaustion, the fear that he'd finally pushed her too far. "You're expecting me to be horrified. To run. You should run." His voice cracked. "I just committed murder, Naomi. Premeditated, calculated murder. I killed a man to send a message, and I'd do it again tomorrow if it kept you safe. I know who you are, Adrian." Her eyes held his, unflinching. "I see all of it, the violence, the darkness, the monster you think you are. And I'm not afraid. I'm not running. I'm choosing you anyway." Something in Adrian's chest broke. The armor he'd maintained for 15 years, the emotional walls that had kept him isolated and safe, the certainty that he didn't deserve softness or love or anything beyond what he could take with violence, it all shattered under the weight of her acceptance. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face against her neck, and for the first time since May died, Adrian Voss broke down. The sobs came without permission, raw and painful, 15 years of suppressed grief and guilt and loneliness pouring out against Naomi's shoulder. She held him through it, her hands gentle in his hair, her voice soft with reassurances he didn't deserve but desperately needed. "I love you," he gasped between sobs. "God help me, I love you more than power, more than empire, more than the safety isolation provides. And I'm terrified that loving you makes me weak, that I've damned you by pulling you into my world, that you'll wake up one day and realize you deserve so much better than a monster with blood on his hands." "Adrian." Naomi pulled back enough to make him look at her, her own eyes wet with tears. "You're not weak for loving me. You're brave. Letting yourself care after everything you've lost takes more courage than any violence you've committed. You deserve better. I deserve to choose." Her voice was firm, certain. "And I choose you. All of you. The protector and the monster. The man who holds me like I'm precious and the man who kills to keep me safe. I choose us, Adrian. If you'll have me. If I'll have you." The laugh that escaped him was broken, disbelieving. "Naomi, you're the only good thing in my life. The only thing that makes me want to be better than what I am. Then choose me. Choose us. Publicly, officially, completely." She framed his face with her hands. "Make me yours in every way that matters, and let me make you mine." Adrian kissed her then, desperate and claiming, pouring everything he couldn't articulate into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to make you untouchable," he said quietly. "Everyone in my world, in this city, in every organization that matters, they're going to know you belong to me. That hurting you means war. That you're not leverage or weakness, you're mine, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. I'm not going anywhere, Naomi promised. No matter how dark it gets, no matter what violence you have to commit, I'm staying. We're in this together. The next morning, Adrian assembled his inner circle in the penthouse, Jin-soo, Dae-young, Hannah, and the key members of his organization who needed to understand the shift that had occurred. Naomi stood beside him, her hand in his, presenting a united front. Viktor Kozlov is dead, Adrian announced without preamble. He made the mistake of threatening what's mine, and he paid for it. Let that be a lesson to anyone else who considers similar action. His eyes swept the room, making sure everyone understood. Naomi isn't my employee anymore. She's not someone I'm casually protecting. She's mine, my partner, my woman, the person who matters more to me than this entire empire. Hurting her, threatening her, or even speaking her name with disrespect carries the same consequences as betraying me directly. Is that understood? The room chorused agreement, but Adrian saw the knowing looks exchanged between Jin-soo and Dae-young, recognition that their cold, isolated boss had finally found something worth softening for. After the meeting dispersed, Naomi helped Adrian out of his blood-stained clothes, her hands gentle as they traced the new bruises he'd acquired during Victor's elimination. "You're hurt," she observed. "Nothing serious." Victor's guards put up more fight than expected. She guided him to the bathroom, starting the shower and helping him under the spray. What followed was tender rather than sexual, Naomi washing blood from his skin, cataloging damage with careful touches, healing wounds that went deeper than anything physical. Adrian returned the favor, his hands reverent as they traced the fading bruises on her wrists, the ribs that were finally healing properly. "I was powerless," he said quietly, water cascading over both of them. "When they took you, for those hours before we found you, I felt exactly like I did at 19 when May died. Completely powerless. But you weren't." Naomi's hands moved through his wet hair. "You found me. You saved me. You eliminated the threat. That's not powerless, Adrian. That's love." Later, dried and dressed in comfortable clothes, they lay tangled together in Adrian's massive bed. Naomi traced the memorial tattoos on his chest, May's name, the flowers, the dates that marked loss. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "About May. The real her, not just how she died." So Adrian did. For the first time in 15 years, he talked about his sister, her laugh, her dreams of becoming a doctor, the way she'd believed he could be more than their circumstances suggested. He talked about the guilt he carried, the empire he'd built from that guilt, the walls he'd constructed to ensure he never felt that powerless again. "She'd like you," he said finally. "May would have liked your strength. The way you survived and kept your kindness despite everything Marcus did. I think she'd be proud of you too," Naomi said. "Not for the violence or the empire, but for learning to love again. For choosing to be vulnerable." Adrian pulled her closer, breathing in her scent, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, proof of life, proof of survival, proof that love could emerge from darkness and become something worth protecting. "I love you," he said again, the words coming easier now. "And I'm going to spend every day proving you didn't make a mistake by choosing me." "I know." Naomi kissed his chest, right over his heart. "And I love you. Monster and man. Darkness and light. All of it." Outside the penthouse windows, the city stretched into darkness, Adrian's empire, his territory, the world he'd built through violence and ruthlessness. But inside, wrapped around Naomi with her acceptance warming places he'd thought frozen forever, Adrian Voss allowed himself something he hadn't permitted in 15 years. Hope. And the fragile, terrifying belief that maybe, just maybe, he deserved the love she was offering. Naomi stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian's penthouse, their penthouse now, watching the city wake beneath a winter sunrise. The sprawl of territory that had once terrified her now felt familiar, almost comforting. She knew which buildings belonged to Adrian's legitimate enterprises, which warehouses stored questionable cargo, which restaurants served as fronts for the empire he'd built from blood and ruthlessness. She'd learned the business. Not the violence. Adrian kept her carefully separated from that world, but the legitimate operations that laundered money and provided cover. The restaurant chains, the real estate holdings, the import-export companies that operated mostly within legal boundaries. She had a head for numbers that surprised everyone, including herself, and a talent for reading people that came from years of surviving Marcus's volatile moods. Adrian's inner circle had been skeptical at first. Jin-soo, Dae-young, even Dr. Kim had watched her with cautious assessment, waiting for her to crack under pressure or prove herself a liability. But Naomi had earned their respect through competence and by understanding something crucial: she didn't need to become like them to belong. She just needed to be herself, consistently and unapologetically. "You're up early." Adrian's voice came from behind her, rough with sleep. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Couldn't sleep?" "Just thinking." She covered his hands with hers, feeling the familiar calluses, the evidence of violence he committed to keep their world safe. "About how different everything is now." "Good different or terrifying different?" "Both." She turned in his arms, studying the face that had once seemed so cold and dangerous. He still carried that edge, probably always would, but now she saw the warmth beneath, the man who laughed at her terrible cooking attempts and held her through nightmares and looked at her like she was the only thing in his world that mattered. Definitely both. The past 6 months had transformed them both. Naomi no longer flinched at sudden movements or apologized for taking up space. She'd reconnected with old friends, started therapy with a psychiatrist Dr. Kim recommended, and slowly rebuilt the parts of herself that Marcus had tried to destroy. The long sleeves had given way to short ones as bruises faded and she stopped hiding the evidence of survival. Adrian had changed too, in ways that shocked everyone who'd known him before. He smiled now, not often, but genuinely when it happened. He'd introduced Naomi to his business associates with pride rather than possessiveness, making it clear she was his partner in every sense that mattered. The cold isolation that had defined him for 15 years had thawed into something warmer, more human, though no less lethal when necessary. "We have the Chin meeting at 10, Naomi said, mentally reviewing their schedule. "And Dae-young wants to discuss the security protocols for the new property." "Always working." Adrian kissed her neck, a smile in his voice. "Remember when you were just trying to stay invisible and survive? Remember when you were an emotionally isolated crime lord who scared everyone? I still scare everyone. You don't scare me anymore." She turned to face him fully. "Well, occasionally. When you go into full Mafia boss mode during negotiations. That's just good business strategy." Their morning routine had become comfortable over the months, coffee together while reviewing schedules, Naomi reading news reports while Adrian handled encrypted messages from his organization, both of them existing in the same space with the easy companionship of people who'd chosen each other completely. The threat came during the afternoon meeting with a potential business partner. Jonathan Chen owned a chain of hotels that would perfect for expanding Adrian's legitimate holdings, but the negotiations had stalled over pricing and terms. Naomi sat beside Adrian during the discussion, contributing insights about market analysis and projected growth that she'd researched thoroughly. Chen's eyes kept drifting to her with speculation that made Adrian's jaw tighten. "I have to say, Voss, I'm surprised you bring your companion to business meetings." "My partner," Adrian corrected, his voice carrying warning. "Naomi understands these holdings better than anyone in my organization. Her insights are why we're even having this conversation." "Of course." Chen's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I wonder if mixing business with pleasure is wise. Creates complications when things inevitably fall apart." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Naomi felt Adrian's control fracturing, saw the violence gathering beneath his composed exterior. She placed her hand on his thigh beneath the table, a gentle reminder that she could handle this herself. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying the confidence 6 months of healing had built. "Your concern is noted but unnecessary. I'm not here because Adrian brought me. I'm here because I've earned my place at this table through competence and dedication. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps we're not the right partners for your expansion plans." She stood, gathering her files with practiced efficiency. "Adrian, I think we're done here. Mr. Chen clearly isn't interested in a professional relationship based on mutual respect." Adrian rose immediately, his eyes holding Chen's with predatory intensity. "My partner is correct. This meeting is over. Jin Su will see you out." As Chen sputtered protests about reconsidering, about not understanding the situation, Naomi walked out with her head high, feeling Adrian's presence at her back like a shield. They made it to the private elevator before he pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "You handled that perfectly," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Better than I would have. I wanted to break his jaw. I know. I felt the violence gathering." She pulled back to look at him. "But I needed to handle it myself. To prove I belong in this world not because of you, but because of me. You've always belonged." His hands framed her face. "From the moment you flinched and I saw something worth protecting. You belonged then, and you belong now. Not as my possession, but as my equal." That evening, after the business of the day concluded, they found themselves on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city. The temperature had dropped with nightfall, and Adrian had wrapped them both in a blanket. Naomi settled between his legs, her back against his chest. "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. "The simplicity of before? When you were just trying to survive and I was just the dangerous boss?" "No." Naomi's answer was immediate. "That version of me was broken, scared, barely alive. This version, the one you helped me become, actually gets to live. You helped you become this. I just provided the safety to let you heal. We helped each other." She turned enough to see his face. "You're different too. More human. Still terrifying when necessary, but not isolated anymore." Adrian was quiet for a moment, and Naomi felt him reach into his pocket. When his hand emerged, it held a small velvet box that made her breath catch. "This isn't a traditional proposal," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring, platinum with a blood-red ruby flanked by diamonds. "I'm not going to get on one knee or pretend I'm a good man who deserves you. I'm still a monster who's built an empire on violence. I still have blood on my hands that will never wash clean. Adrian. But you make me want to be better. You make me remember there's more to life than power and revenge. You see all of me, the darkness and the light, and you don't flinch anymore." His eyes held hers, vulnerable in ways she never thought possible. "Marry me, Naomi. Not because I own you or because you owe me, but because we choose each other. Every day. Despite everything." Naomi took the ring from the box, studying it in the city lights. The ruby caught the glow like captured blood, beautiful and dangerous and perfect. "It's not a diamond," she observed. "Diamonds are for traditional relationships. Ours was born from darkness and violence and two broken people finding each other." He took the ring, holding it ready. The ruby felt more honest. "It's perfect." She extended her hand, her eyes never leaving his face. "Yes. 1,000 times yes. You're my home, Adrian Voss. My safety. My love. The person who saw me when I was invisible and helped me become real again." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there. Then he kissed her, and Naomi tasted promise and devotion and the future they were building together from the ruins of their separate pasts. Later, wrapped together in their bed, Adrian traced the ring on her finger with gentle reverence. "You flinched once," he said quietly, "and changed my entire world. Every day since has been worth it. Every moment of fear, every act of violence to keep you safe, every piece of my armor that had to break. Worth it." Naomi thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, terrified, broken, hiding in plain sight and just trying to survive. She thought about the man Adrian had been, isolated, cold, convinced he didn't deserve softness or love. She thought about how they'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful despite the violence that surrounded them. Every single day, she agreed, her hand covering his heart, feeling it beat steady and strong beneath her palm. Every single day. Outside their windows, the city stretched into darkness, Adrian's empire, their kingdom, the world they'd learned to navigate together. Inside, wrapped in safety and love and the certainty that they'd found exactly what they needed in each other, Naomi and Adrian Voss fell asleep to the sound of each other's breathing. Scarred but healing. Powerful in their unity. Proof that even monsters could learn to love, and even broken things could be made whole again when held by the right hands. Their story had started with a flinch and a broken glass. It would continue with blood and empire and the fierce protection of people who'd chosen each other completely. But most importantly, it would continue with love, messy and dangerous and real, the kind of love that didn't flinch from darkness because it had been born there and learned to create its own light. If you made it to the end, you're exactly the kind of viewer we create these stories for, someone who appreciates moral complexity and characters who feel real. Don't let this be the last one you watch. Hit subscribe and join a community that loves stories where the answers aren't easy and the choices matter. See you in the next one.